Welcome to the latest episode of Reset Now from the Australian Association of National Advertisers and in partnership with Nine and MI3. This is a series where we explore how Australian blue chip businesses and also challenger brands are navigating their way through and ultimately out the other side of this little thing we call COVID-19. My name's Liana Dubois. I'm Nine's Director of Powered, our Marketing Solutions Division for Brands. And of course, I'm joined by none other than Paul McIntyre, the Executive Editor of MI3. Together, we welcome Dean Norbiato to the studio today. Paul, do you want to introduce Dean to us and tell us who he is and what he does?
Thanks, Liana. Well, Dean Norbiato is the General Manager of Marketing for Kia Australia, and I suspect he's about to shake a few trees. Kia has bucked the auto trend in the last couple of years with a record market share for April. That's despite a decline in the auto sector of 50%, and Kia is not pulling back, in Dean's words. In fact, they're putting the foot to the floor in the next couple of months for marketing. Before joining Kia in 2019, Dean was with the agency group Bastian Collective. Prior to that, he was with Swiss Vitamins, and he started his career at Swimming Australia. I think it's probably time we ask Dean a few questions, Liana.
Yeah, so Dean, you started at Kia in about January of 2019, and the very first thing that you were greeted by was the ultimate badge snobbery towards the Kia brand. What do you do with a challenge like that?
Yeah, g'day Liana, g'day Paul. Thanks for having me on, firstly. Yeah, you're totally right. And I think I came into the category without the volumes of auto experience that I guess a few of my other competitors would have. It's almost a badge of honour to be in the industry for 15 to 40 plus years. I didn't have that level of experience within the auto category. However, within our business, there was huge volumes of experience and some really strategic, strong heads in the business. So they brought me on to look at it from a fresh perspective and not be biased towards the auto category. And I guess being able to come in and looking at the market orientation of our product, it was obvious to see that when looking at the traditional funnel, we were doing really well up top, but then down the bottom we're also doing well. But in the middle is where we really let ourselves down in terms of that consideration of our brand. It's almost like people were purchasing it because it was the not the last resort, but because it was a really rational purchase. And there's huge opportunity for us to get further up the funnel, influence through brand and be emotional and have a greater trickle-down effect and effectiveness of our short-term performance marketing. So it was really interesting to see with fresh eyes to actually step away and lean into what are the things that are the biggest challenges with our brand, as opposed to coming in with rose-coloured glasses and going, it's all good, how do we just keep improving what we're doing? So essentially shaking the tree a little bit from the start. And I think we're on a really solid trajectory and plan now and a real clear direction for our brand in the next 12 to 18 months.
Dean, you talk about badge rejectors, and it has been a big challenge for Kia, but it is improving. Talk us through what the numbers look like there at the moment. And what that means, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, talking at the funnel, we have really good aided awareness, unaided awareness at the top. But when you get down to intent, that's when our numbers really do struggle. The challenge there being that to intend to buy a car is there's only 4% of the market that's ever in the market to actually buy a car. So the people who are intenders are a much bigger group and who have preconceived opinions of models that stretch back 4 to 7, 10 years, depending on their buying circumstance or cycle. And then you get into the considerers. They're the ones who are in the next 12 months who are looking to consider and buy a car. And our numbers over the last 2 to 3 years have really increased with regards to the consideration set. But it was evident that it was much further upstream that we had a challenge and a blockage, because when it got down to purchase, we were jumping into consideration, like I said, due to the value of our brand and a key code like the 7-year warranty and what that meant for them. So there's still a ways to go, but off the back of the Australian Open last year, where we really put our foot down on brand, integrated a big campaign with the guys at Channel 9, we had our biggest pool of considerers and the lowest level of rejection down to about 26% that we've ever had in the history. And that's something that we were looking obviously to map again post AO 2020. However, COVID hit and that skewed the numbers considerably.
So COVID was the ultimate backhand, really. What happened when COVID-19 hit? What was the impact?
excellent sporting analogy, backhand off the tennis comment, firstly, Liana.
Thank you very much.
Strong. So what happened is essentially the market went into a state of flux. All of our metrics really were hard to benchmark against previous, especially from a conversion standpoint. When you look at all of our bottom funnel metrics were not available because you physically weren't able to go out and test drive like you were previous. So it really skewed the data, and it's nowhere near a like for like same time last year or even 18 into 17 as well. So it made it really tough to almost take a pause on our metrics and then take somewhat of a pause on our strategy, still going in the same direction, but taking a bit of time to treat it in the context that it deserves.
Dean, you also talk about a sea of sameness in the auto category and a pause or a shift in your strategy during COVID. How do you deal with the sea of sameness, and what was that pause then, and what did you change in your strategic direction through COVID?
Yeah, and I think that comment comes by having fresh eyes in the industry. There's a lot of good stuff that gets done in the auto category, and there's a lot of opportunity as well. And we're very much well, I see us as a challenger brand to the establishment. But when looking at COVID, we analysed the timing quite a lot in terms of the sentiment of consumers, and we executed a campaign really early on that I think was at the mid to end of March when COVID was really kicking off. That was a stay in, stay safe campaign. We tracked that campaign and looked at the VTR of our campaign, especially on digital, and found that it was tracking exceptionally well, if anything better than our hero brand campaign. So that view-through rate was really a key indicator for us to identify that the campaign was working. Towards the 2 weeks of that, so the start of April, the numbers started to significantly decrease, which was the moment that we switched and went back into hero brand campaign. And I feel that you look at the market now and the misattribution obviously would be quite high as everyone gets in to say the same thing in the same language, causing that misattribution. But we monitor it very closely. I think it did a really good job for us at the start. But looking at the VTR, we then came off and then went back to our hero campaign, and now we're looking at the strategies, obviously, to exit out.
So, Dean, you were talking about that sea of sameness, and I guess it creates a bit of an echo chamber when a lot of brands start to climb aboard the messaging of stay home, stay safe, we're here for you, and those sorts of things. But even before COVID, you know, Kia has had to find a way to stand out from the crowd in a very, very large and hyper-competitive auto category. How do you get Kia to differentiate when potentially, you know, it's up against some really significant behemoths in the market and doesn't necessarily have the same scale of marketing budgets that some of your competitors do?
Yeah, great question. And that was one of the pieces of work when I first started. And there's some really big 1,000-pound gorillas in our category who had big marketing budgets, some of the bigger agencies. So we really needed to look at our strategic objectives and work out from the start what we wanted to achieve. And I think by stepping back, we undertook some research and identified, firstly, what we stand for or can stand for as a brand, where are the opportunities in market, and then how do we get there as the key three solutions that we needed to achieve. Now, looking at the market, there is a lot of activity that happened in the top left quadrant. We see huge opportunities being in the right quadrant, and I'm not going to give away the Y and the X axis of that, but there is a path that we need to plot to get some clear air, because ultimately we don't have the media dollars to shout louder than some of the bigger marketers, some of the bigger OEMs or autos in Australia. Therefore, we need to be a lot more strategic. So understanding what we can stand for, understanding where the clear space is, and then understanding how we actually get there and orientate around a single red thread that stitches through our communication and actually creates a point of difference. Because ultimately, the research that we've found is that when someone sees a car ad, they just see another car ad, and then a facade comes down. So we need to ensure that when we're marketing, we're actually cutting through with the dollars that we've got, but then also that we're taking advantage of those big blue chip moments like Friday night footy, partnerships with the Broncos, with the Australian Open, to actually stand out in a very cluttered market. And I'm still a big believer in TV and those magic moments that seem to be still very omnipresent within the Australian public. I mean, you look at the numbers of the Aussie Open last year, significant. You look at the numbers in the early NRL rounds before it stopped. So significant opportunity to use big platforms like that to actually make noise. We just need to ensure that we're standing for something, we're being distinct, and we're actually getting cut through.
Dean, I imagine with a 50% decline in the auto sector in terms of sales through COVID, that your budgets have been hit too. Is it circa that number that you're now having to deal with and build the Kia brand with potentially up to half of what you had prior to COVID? Is that sort of the ballpark we're talking about?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies have experienced similar declines in budgets. We have had cuts, had to think strategically about not just pulling the obvious, which is, okay, get rid of all brand, put your performance metrics up, and then you over-index in the short term in just performance. So we've got really good buy-in from the executive to ensure that over the last 18 months, we've built a really strong case to say, hey, look, whilst we can easily put the foot down on performance and get an increase in short-term sales, what we want to really do is create those bigger foundation blocks of brand that prop us up in the future. We've had some really successful results over the last 2 years by starting to invest more heavily in brand and educate the wider business about the importance and the results of that. So, look, I think the biggest thing for me is, yes, we've had a cut, but we haven't, fortunately, been cutting all of our brand dollars. It's been an even split to get us around 50-50 on brand versus performance.
Dean, I think it's really interesting. You talked about the need to get your broader business buy-in from all key stakeholders right across the board. I think I know the answer to the question, but exactly how hard is that?
Look, it's a journey. It is something to dive deep into a cliche. It definitely doesn't happen overnight, and you need to chip away at that. I was fortunate that there was a propensity within the business towards that. There was a really good marketing knowledge bank within the business already. So those stepping stones had already started. I just needed to continue on that journey and put in additional tactics and strategies to ensure that there was clear communication across all executive members to get their buy-in right from the get-go. So it is something that is a journey. And look, if you start in any new business and say, hey, great, I want to go at 1 million miles an hour, I want to be 90% brand, 10% performance, off we go, and then you have no short-term results, then you often get offside. So it's almost a weaning off that short-termism and then starting to chunk your big building brand blocks underneath as you go.
But gee, it must be hard, Dean, through COVID to hold back on the temptation to go for retail and tactics and performance advertising to sell cars through the dealerships. How is that conversation going, and what's the feeling inside about sticking with brand when it feels like you want to move product?
Yeah, one thing that we've done really well is look at the wider market and not operate in a vacuum, and understand that our actions transpire in a bigger environment. Therefore, if everybody else is using the same data to get to a campaign, then we use that data a bit differently, similar to if everyone is going to be coming out of COVID and retailing extremely in high volumes. Therefore, that gives us an opportunity to, again, be that challenger brand to stand out by doing brand when there is thousands of end of financial year sales going. If you go into our dealerships, absolutely you'll get the best deal. However, we're using brand to cut through and stand out in a market that you would see, in that term you used of sea of sameness. If everyone's retailing and we go brand, that gives us an opportunity to, again, stand out because we don't have the media dollars and clout of some of the bigger competitors.
Dean, can you tell us what the data is showing you around what's happening at a customer level and whether there's been any changes in consumer behaviour, either directly as a result of COVID-19 or just generally in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a few, quite a number of different pipelines that come in from the dealer network, and we get fed information from the coalface on a daily basis. And the big one that we're seeing is the lack of confidence around public transport. Therefore, people looking to take power of their own transport and looking to step into a vehicle. Now, obviously, the numbers are down compared to same time last year and other metrics. However, we are seeing an emerging trend around people looking to take ownership of their own transport. What that flow-on effect is, how long that lasts, unsure. But the information we're getting from the dealer network at the moment is that there is still opportunities, there's conversations, and that one in particular around transport is something that we're monitoring.
Listen, I've got to ask, what has Kia done? You're doing something right. Kia's got record market share, and that's in the lead up to COVID. So what have you done to get that? What's been going on?
Yeah, I would have to say it comes down to our executive team. We have a really strong, highly esteemed executive team who've spent most of their professional life in the auto industry. Our COO, Damien Meredith, started in the business in 2014. And then from there, we've had a steady incline to finishing third, like you mentioned last month. Now, he brought in a couple of big things, and originally it was we stood for being cheap. That's what we were. So he got rid of pricing on all of our cars for 18 months above the line, and then also ushered in a 7-year warranty, which really has been the key code and backbone of the rise of our business over the last 6 years, and something that we've kind of fed off. But it's got us to a point that we need to now start investing into the brand to get people buying at an emotional level as well. And I think the entire business exec, from our head of sales, who essentially is, to use a sporting analogy, like the dummy half who basically steers the sales team who are the forwards around. And then the marketing team sits out in the backs as halfback to usher in and score the points out wide with our product and PR teams. And then our COO is essentially the coach of that entire environment, and then knows how to motivate and get the best out of each individual player for a common goal, which is to, grow our market share, improve the equity of our brand, and really invest, in the equity of our brand. And that's something that when we have all-in meetings, the first thing is always how do we improve our brand. So when that's coming right from the top down, it does make my job a lot easier.
Dean, you've talked a lot so far today about your broader business, how you're all working together and how you're all lent into a really common goal. And it sounds like you have quite an extraordinary culture inside Kia, led by yourself, obviously, and the broader exec team. How are you, as an exec, leading your team through this period of time? There'd be a lot of people in your team, I'm sure, who have never seen a market shock like COVID-19 or any of the prior market shocks that we've experienced in our careers. What are you doing as an exec to guide your teams through, and what sort of skills and capabilities are you looking for and encouraging in them? Yep. So we're keeping very busy, but I guess the one word is just communication. So we meet twice daily as an exec team at 10:30 and 4:30 every day, which may sound onerous. And at the start, I kind of felt, is this too much? But as we get into the groove of that key information sharing and the amount of information that we're gleaming and using to improve the business has been really important through this time. And then from that, I then step that down to the marketing team and ensuring that I'm flowing all the most salient information down to the marketing team so they feel bought in. Going from being a very much rusted on working in office establishment to then working remotely, working from home, takes a lot to get used to, and you need to treat everyone different with regards to that. So we've really used communication and the flow of information as a key glue to hold everything together for this time before we then usher and move back into the office. Also looking at being quite cross collaborative. So we're setting up, I think we've got about 15 projects that we're working on now, in addition to the everyday work that we're doing that require the head of performance in the marketing team to work across with the head of brand to ensure that they're cross collaborating, but then also improving incrementally their knowledge of brand and their knowledge of performance. You've got we've got a really good sponsorship manager who heads up all of our partnerships, and she's stretching herself into PR and working out how she can grow outside of our assets value for the brand. So not to mention the cross collaboration within other departments and the opportunities that marketing can play a role. So we've seen it as a brand as being a real opportunity to grow a skill set and really foster and glue the business together.
Dean, the next 6 months, you talk about putting your foot down in coming months, and you've got, I think, a new model launch coming up, right? It's the Sorrento. You're not pulling back on that. You're going to go all in. So what does the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months look like for you in marketing and for Kia?
It's going to be a real strong focus on the power of our product. And when I stepped into this brand, there was a tagline that sat at the back of all of our comms that was the power to surprise. And we just did it, but we didn't orientate any comms around it. And I've kind of used that off the back of the big piece of brand work that we did with our agency in Ocean, is to determine that the power to surprise isn't I sit in a Kia and I thought it was shit, but oh, wait a minute, it's actually a really good car. No, let's flip that. So the power is in our product. We have exceptional product that I dare you to index against any other product, and it will stand up and beat that product, if not, exceed expectations. And then you look at the surprise. The surprise then isn't, oh, wow, I thought it was bad, but it's good. The surprise is in the way that we communicate. And I've called out before the work that Uber Eats did around the Australian Open campaign to be very agnostic to TV and launch a campaign that actually grabbed eyeballs and was different and salient and stood out. So that's what we're looking to do, is take that surprise element in our Power to Surprise and communicate a little bit differently to a category. And then especially to the models, because when you look at the models that we market, they all come from the same data. So every model in medium SUV, small SUV, passenger, the OEMs or the autos are pulling in the same data and coming to a very similar conclusion. So we're looking to utilize the information at hand, but then to come out with something that really stands out in category, but not be so disparate that it doesn't make sense to the last launch. So stitching that red thread through our communications, therefore we start building equity and understanding in our brand to ensure long-term success.
Dean, as we motor out the other side, pun intended, of COVID-19, what do you really want to see from the Australian marketing, advertising and media industry? What would you love to see happen?
Look, I would like everyone to stay true to their brand platforms and don't be just blinded by the fact that we're in COVID to just translate to a message that is just about, you know, we've all been in this together. Let's all pull out of it together. It's take your own spin on what your brand stands for and be very clear in terms of the direction that you're going, and to ensure that the different touch points, be it the creative, be it the copy, be it the narrative, is in that direction. I think calling out Aldi, I saw some stuff from them late last week, early this week, with regards to their spin on COVID, which was very Audi. It had baked in DNA of Audi from a creative standpoint. And I thought that was an excellent example of them using a crisis, but using it through their own brand lens. So don't just put on the COVID goggles, but make sure that you put on your brand goggles first to ensure that what you're putting through out to the wider public has your DNA through it. And it's not just COVID for COVID's sake.
And the final prediction from you, Dean, is what will your market share be this time next year? Number one.
Oh, wouldn't it be nice? Look, hey, we're still very much a humble Korean car manufacturer, and we're just trying to do the best that we can in the auto market. Look, hopefully we can surprise a few people along the way with regards to the way that we communicate, get a lot more consumers on board with our brand. But look, anywhere above where we are now, as we look to use momentum and continually move forward, is a win for us.
Dean, thank you for your time this morning. I think there's been some really fantastic key takeouts for today, including things like being true to your brand platform, but being distinctive, look for the gap and duck and weave and find your way to stand out from the crowd. And lastly, probably to have that whole of business approach that you've talked about quite a bit. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. To all of you at home, thank you for joining us. This has been Reset Now, and we'll see you next week.